What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the Brown Girl Green Pod. I'm your host, Christy Drutman, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. I am so excited to be doing this at home IRL podcast with our guest today, and I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alexa White. I am the executive director of the IO Research Institute, as well as a Ph.D. candidate at the University of Michigan in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology.
Incredible. And so could you dive in a little bit on your background? Like, tell us more about your journey. Like, why did you study these things to that extent? To get to that level? Like, what made you passionate about it?
100%. So I went to Howard University. At the time, I was really not interested in academics. I wasn't really interested in much of anything, and I kind of followed my parents' pathway to becoming a doctor. I said I was going to become a dermatologist, but it was really hard for us to figure out what to do for school. And so there was this National Science Foundation funded program where they were like, okay, if you go into the desert and collect these lizards, we'll pay you money to go to school. And I was like, okay, cool, let's go. I went, I loved it. They all were like, you should go to grad school. I went to grad school, and that was really how it all began. I always wanted to become a crocodile hunter, but it turned out that now I do people stuff and food stuff. So when I got to Michigan for my PhD program, I worked in a coffee agroecology lab. And so there we were looking at coffee tests and trying to understand the biological context of farming. And so I was all fun, and I was like, I don't really think that I'm getting as much from the lifters as I am from the farmers. And so I started to question that, and that became my whole dissertation my whole life. And it took me a while, but I think I was primed to do it. So I come from a family of sharecroppers from Texas and North Carolina. And so my grandfather, he would take care of me after school and talk to me all about planting. We had gardens, and agriculture had a lot of part of my life. I just hadn't really recognized it until I got to grad school.
Wow, that's really cool. So it's kind of like in your DNA in a lot of ways.
Yes, I would say that.
That's really cool. So for people who don't know, could you define what agroecology is?
Yeah, so you could think of it as a managed landscape versus a natural landscape. And so agroecology is looking at the interaction between the two and seeing how they can synergistically work together. So for example, when you think about on TV, a farm with a barn and corn, and that picture is not exactly a good agroecological space. There should be a lot more diversity. The nature around the forest edge is really important. Agroecology means that you're working with the land, working with the space. You want pollinators to come, which means you want different kinds of things for them to pollinate. You're paying attention to the soil, the incline of the land.
Whereas a ranch is not good.
No, not at all. So the diversity is one, the livestock, and then usually the livestock is so concentrated in one area that it's getting rid of all of the vegetation that would have been there anyway, as opposed to if it's kind of like an open graze or an agroforestry setup, maybe working within the trees and there'd be a lot of shade and different things growing. That's a simple way for me to explain it. But when you think of a farm on television, that is you should Google what agroecology is, and it generally looks like a forest, I would say.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, because people will always be like, oh, they glorify this cottagecore or farm lifestyle, but they're not necessarily thinking about the ecosystem that
Yeah.
they're just let me build a house.
Yes.
This land and live a little fairy life, but yeah, it's more complicated than that when you're involved with bigger ecosystem.
Exactly. You can make the cottage though in tune with nature. It doesn't have to be just clear a bunch of land in the middle of the forest and say you're not engaged with the forest anymore.
Right. That's really interesting. And with today's industrial agricultural space, it just seems there's less and less land to practice things agroecology.
Yeah, so a part of my research is really looking at who owns land and land tenure. A lot of the land, specifically within the United States, obviously we're on taking land from native indigenous populations. And the way in which we have relationships with land is very kind of parsed apart, right? So, in order to own land, it takes a lot of bureaucracy. You usually have to go through the selling and owning process. It's not easy, and it's capital instead of considered a way to live, how you can like survive in a yeah.
Wow, that's wild. And, a big part of thinking about agroecology and stuff that you've also explored is this concept of like food sovereignty. I think going back to this whole like fantasy of like, okay, Colombia is like cottage off the grid,
Yeah.
live off the land. It seems like right now, like there is only a small percentage of people that can like actually maybe do that in a self-sustaining way. It's actually a lot more, it seems like expensive to be able to do things like that. And in general, like, well, first, I'd love for you to define what food sovereignty is. But secondly, like, yeah, going back to this concept of like who owns land, like what are the connections between who owns land and like who gets access to food sovereignty?
Yeah, so we have completely, as an American society, outsourced all of our food. Everyone associates food with supermarkets as opposed to farmers. There are kind of really surface level ways that you can engage, like community, search agriculture, a food co-op, and those are a little bit better. But even so, you don't have a real relationship with the farmer. And so food sovereignty is basically saying that you should be able to know where your food comes from, who's creating your food, and have a cultural relationship with it. And the best way for me to describe it is compare it to our term food security. So food security means that you have food to eat. It means you're not starving. But my advisor likes to put it in context of like in prison. So in prison, you get 3 square meals a day. There's some nutritional standard, and there's a way for you to kind of continue living, but we don't actually know where that food came from. It probably isn't culturally relevant to you. You have no decision-making power over that. And being able to be a food sovereign person means that you get to decide, really. You have some sort of autonomy over your food. And so, when you go to the supermarket and you go get something that's packaged and it says like, oh, it came from Mexico, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are food sovereign either. How did it get there? An example I usually like to bring up is, so let's say we're in New York and you go to the supermarket and you pick up a mango. It's January. How did that mango get to you in the middle of January? It had to be grown somewhere near the equator, probably where it can just exist at all times. And then who is growing it? The reason why it's so cheap here is because it's outsourced labor, or honestly, it's slave labor because they're not being paid the amount. Then it has to get put into a truck, usually go through a bunch of roads to get to a plane, to get to New York, to stand in plastic and styrofoam in your supermarket, which then might go to waste because a lot of the food that we get here is to waste anyway. So it's like the entire food system, very fractured. It's very problematic, and we interact with it all day, every day. So it's a problem that we all interact with and just don't know how much of a change we do.
And I think it's also a part of, cultural habits that we live in a society where people just, want things when they want things all the time year round. So like we've also like kind of been socialized to encourage a food system that isn't about seasonal buying, isn't about buying locally. It's about like, I want the cheapest, easiest thing that probably contains lots of things. Shouldn't be eating like.
Yes.
But you don't have food sovereignty. You don't really have the choice in that. Like, what?
Yeah.
This is your only options. Like, unless you pay a premium to get out of that system, right?
Yeah, like Errol. Homeowners and all that kind of stuff. Like 4 or 5 is idea.
Right.
Like luxury food items when it's like, I don't know. My personal journey within this past year has been to put a lot more time and effort into things that I need to survive. So for example, if we're not talking about food, a mattress. We sleep a third of our lives and we do not pay attention to what we're sleeping. We should probably pay attention to what we're eating in the same way. But yeah, you're right about seasonality and pay attention to what is geographically accurate. Tropical fruits and vegetables aren't meant to be there. And the reason why they got there is because of a lot of colonial history and how there was a lot of kind of discovered fruits, vegetables, items that they saw were growing. Discovered. Stolen. Put into these different places in the northern and southern hemisphere.
Right.
Wow. Yeah.
That's interesting. So in your research and, the things you're passionate about, like what are the solutions? Like, what is this to address something that complex where you feel like you don't really have options?
Yeah, so I think what's really important to think about is that we've dealt with hard things before. I am very much a proponent of kind of optimism when it comes to this stuff because everyone else is doing great. And in writing my dissertation, which I did last week, actually,
Slay.
yeah, I realized that a lot of the theories around food sovereignty just go back to how we've always done it, right? And so industrial agriculture, corporate agriculture, it hasn't existed for that much time compared to the amount of time humans have existed. Small scale agriculture has been resilient through time. And so it's possible. It's just a question of if we want to change our structures. The kind of surface way to change that would be to get a much more intimate relationship with your food. So being really attentive about where your food comes from, how you are actually getting that food, and what food is local to your graphic and topographic area. So for example, around here, a lot of stone fruit is really popular. Berries, apples, things like that are really key to this area. Pumpkin, and then also paying attention to how we are individuals. And putting the onus on the individual is not good because it's overwhelming. And I feel like that's where a lot of the pessimism comes in when it comes to climate and food. And a lot of that has to do with us. We need to realize that we have to deal with this in a systemic way. The food system is global. The food system is interconnected. The food system is really controlled by a lot of agribusinesses and agrochemical companies. And in order to combat that in a capitalist society, we have to go through policy. You have to go through regulation. You have to go a lot of reform and revolution when we think about those things. So here in the United States, a bill that's really important for agriculture is the Farm Bill. It's an omnibus bill, just meaning that it contains a whole lot of stuff. Every 4 years, it needs to be redone. And I don't think a lot of attention is put towards it, and it should be because there's a lot of lobbyists that are very, very, very adamant about it never changing to sway out agriculture.
So is a farm bill like the bill that like is running like how
Yeah.
yeah. It's the farm bill about farms.
No, what it is, so it's subsidizing a lot of the farms that we get our food from within the United States. And so a lot of my work has actually been done in Hawaii, where they don't have a good relationship with the subsidies that come from the farm bill because the United States generally the farm bill isn't kind of geared to the things that come from Hawaii. So they produce a lot of macadamia nuts and like specialty crops and pineapple and stuff like that. And the farm bill really goes towards a lot of grains, cereal crops and wheat. You know how like the old food pyramid where at the bottom it's like grain? That's incorrect. First of all, it's been redone recently, but generally the idea that we should eat all of the cereal crops and a lot of grain and carb came out of like the 60s and 70s post World War II during the Green Revolution. The world realized, oh my God, we have a problem. We have a Burger King system and we need to produce enough food so that we can like survive these wartimes and this violence. And cereal crops does to do that. So we see a lot more bread. We see a lot different kinds of cereals that are meant to kind of like keep us going with that energetic caloric intake. But you also see the injection of those things into the global south. So there's a lot of pressure from the global north to produce a lot more cereal, even though they had different kinds of diets. They'd have to produce more in general. The yield of the crops needs to be much better. I'm getting off topic now.
No, I love it.
Yeah.
No, keep going. No, I love it.
So then, back to the farm bill. So the farm bill also came about around that time, but it exists today mainly to keep everything going. So on top of the farm bill is SNAP benefits. So food stamps and the way that people who are financially able to get food comes from the farm bill. So when you're on the farm bill, it's much more important than anything. Like it has to deal with farmers getting subsidies. It has to deal with how corporate agribusinesses are kept in power, and it also has to deal with people who have much less political power being able to eat. And so the way forward is to pay attention to it, understand there's a lot of lobbying around it, and thinking about how we can change it over the next 4 years and that's when it overlaps.
So what are the opportunities with like the farm bill to address like what you're talking about, like small small farms?
Yeah, so we generally have an opportunity every time the farm bill comes to attach different things to it. So it's all those bills. There's a lot of bills that are attached to it. In order to change who gets subsidies, you have to speak to your congresspeople that are attached to each state. And they're the ones that allow it to get passed every year. It has a lot to do with the budget too. Every year during the fiscal turnover, the budget for the farm bill changes. And then specific demographics that get the subsidies are also skewed. So there's a whole entire literature about like chattel slavery, and then thinking about sharecropping to and no more sharecropping, but they still have ownership of this land or ownership of this land, and that was all extracted over time,
Right.
or the 50s and the 60s, because one of this narrative that like you had to go north and you had to work in these factories and you had to be able to, provide support. You don't want to work on the farm. You don't want to do that. But their realization that like land is capital. Like if you think about it, you get down to the core of what people need to survive.
Ready. It's
You
land.
need land.
Yeah.
You need land so that you can go shelter. You need land so that you can go feed.
Right.
You need land so that you have rights to water.
Right.
And in terms of the Farm Omnibus Bill, it's truly about building up politics. It's also about political windows and paying attention to timing of when the omnibus bill is about to come out. You usually don't hear about it on the news.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
never hear about it.
Yeah. It's huge. It's very important for us and farmers within the United States. And on an international level, agriculture is a lot more of a bigger mess than it is and is structured. So you ought to have influence within the United. I also don't like I'm sorry, it's something that American, but also international.
Yeah. Oh,
I know a lot about the US. Yeah, paying attention to when it comes out. It just came out a little less than a year ago. Usually it gets stalled, mainly because there's a lot of debate internally about where the subsidy should go and who should get SNAP benefits. But those debates aren't televised just because it's not,
right.
it's not real hot and nice and sexy to talk about.
I get it. It literally is our survival.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So recently, you received the Federation of American Scientists Policy Entrepreneurship Award in 2023 for your incredible work with the IA Research Institute. So I want to hear a little bit more on what IA is and the impact that you made with it.
IA is an acronym.
Oh, I saw.
Yeah. So me and my best friend, Adria Peterkin, she's a PhD candidate at MIT. We went to Howard together. We were roommates, and we decided that we needed to create our own environmental justice organization. So I would say that we were mentored by Dr. Beverly Wright. She runs the Duke Center for Environmental Justice when we were at Howard. And she brought us to COP21 in Paris, and we saw it get signed and met Obama, and it was a fantastic situation where all of my friends at Howard were different scientists, and we all had a connecting piece to our lives, to our history, because it was Howard's HBCU. And we were exposed to kind of how to operationalize a lot of the theory scientists often do. So when you think about a scientist, you usually think about like a typical man that's white with glasses and works in a lab. Obviously, we're combating that stereotype, but it's also not someone that's good at communicating. It's not someone that you want to talk to. When you think of a man in science, it generally isn't someone that you think like will become president. And so at IA, what we do is we try and change that narrative. So the mission is to increase the amount of scientists and engineers of color that are involved in environmental justice research.
So cool.
Thank you. And so a lot of the projects that we work on are with different environmental justice organizations that need capacity building and support. Oftentimes, the grassroots organizations don't have the ability to run some sort of soil testing or do some sort of experiment that would prove the points that they're trying to make through advocacy. And so our goal is to change that. So I, as a think tank, where our framework is that we have a fellowship program with graduate students. They work with these organizations. They learn how to communicate. They learn how to engage with communities properly, not be extractive, not just take this data and kind of put it into the side alley like academic research, make a difference, actually do the things that they say that they want to do, as opposed to, being pulled away by private industry and paid a lot more money than what you normally get paid as a nonprofit or, doing the work for good. And so A lot, thanks. A lot of the work that we do at AYA led to my inspiration to work with FAS, the Federation of American Scientists. So they had several different fellowship programs. At the time, it was the pandemic. I didn't know what I was doing. I knew that I was interested in international food systems. I knew that I really liked talking to farmers, and I didn't know how to involve that. I didn't know how to have a conversation at a bar with someone about our research. And I really wanted to do that. And I thought getting into policy would help me do that. So when I joined, I started thinking about environmental justice and tech and figuring out how we're actually going to materialize environmental justice work. So I started to get really interested in environmental justice screening tools. And so these tools are now very popular for their application and policy. So basically what it is, it's just having geographic maps and being able to determine exactly where they are, where populations in need are. So there are federal level ones, state level ones, and then there's private ones and nonprofit ones. Mine is doing some of the back end work with the EJ screen, which came out of EPA, to better figure out how to handle the largest problem, which is kilos and I'm sure you know too. It's a backpass. Basically, if there are layers in a map that determine, oh, if you're here, the air quality is really bad, and on this level of the map, the soil is going to have a lot of metals in it. They don't understand how that individually will affect the person and their health. And so these tools right now are meant to kind of collaborate, and they're supposed to use multiple tools in order to kind of narrow in on one specific question. Well, people don't know that. People don't know how to use them.
No way.
The ethics behind
DJ screen.
Yeah,
And I was like,
it's not easy.
No.
Especially for a layperson. And it's fun. You're supposed to, the people that will be these vulnerable populations that come on these places in the map.
Like if you're dying, like if you're struggling with like asthma, like blowing out all these things, like your first thought is not gonna be like, let me go on this website and like understand about this.
Right. Well, we can just figure out where to move. Like, you don't know how to use that.
Yeah, like where am I supposed to go? Yeah.
Right. And so I saw that, and that motivated me to kind of want to know about like the tech, how it gets made. And then that led me down another rabbit hole of data ethics, right? So like when you think about where all of the data that's coming from for these tools is sourced, it's census data. Census data is gappy. Census data is very unreliable. And you think about like big data sources, and it's not a really good measure of need things. And so a lot of the work that I was doing was one, to figure out cumulative impacts. A lot of people at Berkeley, actually at Rachel Rowe Frost, are doing a lot of good work for that. But also just being able to educate people on kind of what this is being used, what is new, it's come up within the past 10 years, and it's going to be used in regulations that aren't necessary. People will take it as, their Bible. They'll take it as like the absolute thing when I'm getting on to another rant. Science is political. I try and make it very objective, and that it is something that you can calculate, and it's always going to be
definitely not
100%.
Science is used to benefit the populations. That's money to benefit from it.
Yeah,
like, let's be real.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's all about, this ivory tower kind of way of thinking, specifically academia, where it's like, I know about this in biology and chemistry, as opposed to like an application. And I feel as though data ethics has the power to kind of combat that, and just allowing people to even know what it will be used for is helpful, because then they can protect themselves. And a lot of politicians, they don't want to disagree, but they use it in order to make decisions. And so just going back through that process of understanding where something came from is really important to me. And I think that people should just know that this is something made for you, and you need to,
It's either like you're going to be deciding it or someone going to be deciding it for you.
Yeah.
And for people, just as a reiteration, that's the EJ, or Environmental Justice Screening Tool, and people want to Google that and check that out later. It is a really interesting tool. It's not the most user-friendly, but it's getting there. And it's probably like the best we have in terms of like community-driven data.
Oh, what's it? Well, that could be award. Yeah. So that was the work that I was doing. Through that, I grew to be a lot of what it was today. I understood policy a lot better, and a lot of that work kind of expanded into a vast number of different projects.
Obviously, you've given some like really interesting insights on things around the farm bill, but like, what are some other like policies or initiatives that, you know, in your vision of actually building a more like just and sustainable future needs to move forward in this country today to actually make progress?
I just stepping back one more time to the screening tools. So a really big issue with it was that it didn't include race and the distribution of race in this country. I feel as though that was a damning fault, mainly because the entire premise of EJ in the United States is based on race. And if you're going to address EJ problem, you need to address race. That being said, when you think about policies and regulations, I think that we always have to keep in mind the capacity and the bureaucracy of the government. Things will happen in time. The speed at which they happen are or is questionable, but we do so within political windows, right? And so the other policies that I think are really important are those that are at the state level and surround culture. The regulatory bodies at state by state level are really important for figuring out how to move away from industrial agriculture. And if we compare ourselves to Europe, the agrochemical businesses can run amok here compared to what they can there. The reason why a lot of the agrochemical business can do that is because we don't really identify specific chemicals that should and should not be used within the food system as much as the EU does. In terms of really specific policies, I'm more so in the camp of increasing the amount of positions, kind of like legacy positions that are within the agricultural space to be stewards for this kind of work. So I think that it was really a good thing for Detroit in particular to get its own kind of agricultural stewardess. So Tafira, she is a farmer from Detroit and has had that farm for a really long time, really been involved in the community, a native Detroiter, and now she is their sustainability rep specifically for urban farming in Detroit. I think that more positions like that need to come about. People who actually know how to work the land need to be in power. A lot of indigenous kind of environmental justice, not even just environmental justice, indigenous people in general, indigenous knowledge is key to understanding the land. It's literally indigenous land, and we keep kind of going in these circles of trying to understand what we could do to be more sustainable, and it was sustainable before we got here. We just have to kind of go back to what was. A lot of my research in Hawaii had to do with figuring out how they could be more self-sufficient in terms of an island. So FYI, Hawaii as an archipelago, as an island, if they're hit by a natural disaster, they only have enough food to survive for 3 days. They do not have more. If they're cut off from the rest of the world, there are no more imports. They have 3 days worth of food compared to the population. So the reason why I was doing my research was because the Governor Green, wanted to make Hawaii much more self-sufficient. Because if you think about when the indigenous Polynesian folks got to the island, they had canoes. They didn't have boats, but they had boats and like planes and stuff. They just were growing the food there. And agrochemical companies like just had a field day on the island of Hawaii, experimenting and figuring out what chemicals they could. Basically, it's their lab or was their lab, and so there's a whole.
They destroyed everything by doing that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of narratives and stories about them being placed next to schools with a lot of Hawaiian children, and. There are plenty of documentaries that go to how these agrochemical companies basically just weren't regulated, and so there are places now that you just can't grow food, period, because that is where it was, and a lot of genetically modified crops that they experiment on there. They're okay. I must get really plant biology here. So like, let's say you have a place in Hawaii, and you're trying to figure out what pesticides or herbicides you want. So a lot of these pesticides and herbicides are actually bred into so that basically like a beetle or something won't want to eat it. Right. And they pollinate. And a lot of the dispersion is through the air. And so although they might have like bypasses or regulatory body to have it contained in this one space, they don't ever talk about the airspace. And so all of the pollination that's happening in this space and all of it's just it goes anywhere it wants to. It's not just staying there, and that was not regulated then. I'm getting way out. I don't remember what you asked me, but basically,
Hawaii only has food for 3 days.
Hawaii has food for 3 days. I really like paying attention to a lot of island ecosystems because they provide a really good model for being self-sufficient and, paying attention to what you are growing on your land and eating what's culturally relevant.
So in a way, like, do you think that there's like a new movement now? People go around the term regenerative, right? Like that's the new sustainable.
Yes.
It's the new
Yes.
and
Yes.
and that's supposed to be this idea that like we're building systems that can last a long time. It's not just about sustaining resources, it's about regenerating it, so being able to create, cycles of like more abundance of like things that like last longer and be self-sustaining, right? And so in a way, the way that you're describing it is like in your ideal world, like we're building more systems where people feel the agency and the knowledge and like the leadership to be able to have, control over what they're putting in their bodies.
100%. Yes. So that's from when you think about food system, it really is kind of infinite from the seed to you planting in that soil,
Right.
to it growing a certain way, to you harvesting it, to you cooking it. And so, so when I talk about food sovereignty and kind of like thinking about it in a context, it is multifaceted. It is extremely complex in terms of ways that you can participate. Yeah, so I do that in 3 ways. One, just paying attention to your food and thinking about where it comes from, how you're related to it. You need food to survive, and you should really care about, wanting to be involved in that process. Two, do not pull all the blame on yourself. Be optimistic. You've done hard things before, specifically in the United States. We've gotten through the civil rights movement. We figured out how to, fly planes and make cars and do all kinds of crazy things. This is no different. And in doing that, we have to realize that this is a systematic problem. Play and, not wasting your food and all those things. Those are great and they are impactful, but what will be most impactful is addressing the system. In the United States, the way to address the system is to understand the Farm Omnibus Bill and to understand kind of where these regulatory bodies are having their way on your life. And so for you and I, that's very easy. We're here in this place, and we're successful and have the knowledge and the know-how and the resources to kind of make that change. But what we're doing, and if I would assume you're listening to this podcast, you have those resources too. We have to fight for the people that cannot, for example. So for those people that would never be able to, have time to listen to things like this or have an hour to be able to go to their states and figure out exactly, what the Farm Omnibus Bill is, you're working for them to change the system that exists with it. Yeah.
And do you have any like books or resources that you recommend people check out to learn more about this?
Yeah, 100%. So the work from Ashley Gruber, she's a professor at Temple University. She works on a lot of Black urban agriculture research. All of her stuff is great. I really have had a lot of fun with understanding fiction and its blend with agriculture. I'm sure you saw this brought this up before. Parable of Sour by Octavia Butler. Afrofuturism is a perfect kind of like moral and ethical guide for thinking about this stuff. It's really big. It seems really cumbersome, but it's possible. Octavia Butler is one of my favorite authors. And then a lot of work by Rob Wallace. Rob Wallace is a guy who works in my lab. This is a whole nother idea about industrial agriculture, but basically he argues that the way that agribusinesses are operating is going to produce more disease. So things like COVID-19, all of that stuff. All the food that we eat generally comes from mammalian resources. They kind of infringe upon these kind of like fringes of nature and farms. And when you place a lot, like let's say you go to you place a lot of cows in one plate, they're all standing in their own feces, they're all bunched together. That is a breeding ground for disease and just speed up the evolutionary process for viruses to hop over to humans. Hey, it's cool. Read his books. Those are the three people I like.
And how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so my website, alexawhite.co. I post a lot of different things that I'm doing and ways to contact me. All of my handles on all social media are Alexa B Went. So Alexa like Denzel Alexa, and then B is a boy, and then white like the color. And yeah, the Iowa Research Institute, the iowaresearchinstitute.org. Those are all of them.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us and teaching us a little bit about agroecology and our interesting food system and how we can start addressing it. And for people listening, this was Brown Girl Green, where I interview environmental leaders and advocates about the importance of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as creative solutions to the climate crisis. Join us again for the next episode. And in the meantime, subscribe to the Brown Girl Green podcast, wherever you get your show, and the Brown Girl Green YouTube channel, and follow the new Brown Girl Green podcast Instagram at Brown Girl Green Podcast. Catch you on the next episode.